You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com. Well, hello everyone. I'm Chris, and this is a bit of a public service announcement to just brace yourselves for complaints about everyone from Belatar to Lav Diaz as we dive into a most heinous form of bigotry. Bigotry against quote-unquote long films, and explore all the prejudices stopping us and you from watching them. Yes, are you part of the problem? Do you think the perfect runtime for a film is 90 minutes? Do you complain about so-called bloated films and how directors need to be reined in by their editors? Do you sigh if you see the runtime is 2 hours or more? Do you avoid watching most films that are 3 hours or longer? Well, in that case, you may either feel attacked or seen. I genuinely don't know how many long film bigots we have on the panel today, so let's just pull off the band-aid and hear how deep the hatred goes. And who knows, maybe we'll become better people by the end of this. And maybe you will too. So let's play a bit of a game here to see just how bad the situation is. I'll start listing runtimes, and my possibly terrible co-hosts will stop me when they start to feel cold sweats at imagining sitting through such a long film, especially if they're not sure if they'll enjoy it. So, are you ready? 1 hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours. Oh, did I hear something there?
No, I'd say 2 hours 15 would be my limit, unless it's something I'm really interested in.
All right. Soul cracks first at 2 hours and 15 minutes. So let's add 15 minutes to that then. 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I'll pick this one.
Yeah, maybe 2 hours, 2.5 hours, depending on how much I want to see it.
Okay. So now we have 2:15 and 2.5. And I'd actually join 2.5 too if the film I'm not sure if I'll enjoy. Though it's borderline. I might survive to the 3 hour mark, which is next on my list here. 3 hours. Will you cop out, Tom?
Yeah, if it's a film that I'm not sure I'm going to enjoy, 3 hours seems like quite a bit of time to invest.
All right. So I'll cop out there too. And I had actually written out 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, etc. too. So I didn't have to read my full list. But Saul, since you were the first one to speak, why that early comparatively to the rest of us? What is it that happens when you just jump over the 2 hour points that make you go a bit uneasy?
I suppose just a lot of it comes down to how much a film is doing for me. If I'm really invested in a film, I don't actually mind how long it is. And if we get to the question later on, I've actually got some very long films in my all-time top 100. So film length isn't a killer for me, but I have a pretty good, I guess, mental awareness, internal clock in terms of how long a film is going on for. And even sitting in cinema, I'm not a film purist, so I will occasionally look at my watch. And I guess, once it gets past the 90-minute mark, you sort of start to feel that this is a bit of a longer film. And I guess when it gets well over the 2 hour mark, it's not just 2 hours and 5 minutes, but well over, so 2 hours and 15. Unless it's something that you're heavily invested in, I guess I find myself unconsciously or without really wanting to do it, I find myself looking to see how it's going to wrap up. So, I sort of see that it's getting towards the 2 hour mark. I'm sort of thinking, well, is this going to be wrapping up now? I'm imagining ways that will be wrapping up. So I guess I'm generally less invested in it, unless it's something that's just totally gripped me. So yeah, that just seems to be my breaking point. But if it's something which I actually expect to not like, then I'd say my limit will probably be closer to 105, 110 minutes. But 135 is like something which I think, maybe I'll like.
And Tom, you're the person who waited all the way to 3 hours and only for films you weren't sure if you would like it. How does what Saul is saying here make you feel?
I can understand Saul's perspective, and I kind of respect it in a way, because there's times where I have sat through long films and I'm thinking, this is not for me, but I've stuck with it because once I started a film, I have to see it through to the end. So I kind of wish I had a bit of restraint like Saul, but I'm not fazed by long run times. I wouldn't say that I actively seek out long films in any way. But if a film's been highly acclaimed or is by a director that I admire, then I'm more than willing to take a punt on it regardless of the time.
And it's a bit harder for you too, no? Because you said you hate actually pausing films or doing anything while you watch them, but well, Saul does not have that problem.
That's right, yeah. I like to see them as the director intended in one sitting. So I remember a few years back, I actually booked a day off work so I could watch Satan's Tango in one sitting in the 7 hours. So I could appreciate it. I got my drinks lined up and some snacks next to me, so I didn't have to move from the sofa. Although I may have taken 1 or 2 toilet breaks. I am only human after all. But yeah, that was an experience.
I mean, that film is also broken up into parts as well, so it's a little bit more excusable, I guess, to click pause.
Exactly, yeah. There's a few natural breaks which are welcome in a film with a runtime at that length.
What about you, Lauren? Did you take a day off work to watch Satan's Tango?
I watched it about an hour a day for a week because I just felt I wouldn't be giving it my full attention if I watched it in one sitting. But with the max runtime thing, like if I don't think I'll like a film, like even 4 minutes can be too long for a short film that I think is going to be rubbish. But generally, I'm not really bothered by a film's runtime. It's more like, do I feel like just sitting down and being here in this space for longer than 2 hours or 2.5 hours? And I often just don't have the time because I'm busy doing other stuff. So if I'm going to sit down, 2.5 hours is sort of a good amount of time where I definitely have that, like a block of time free to sit there and get invested. But, I've seen films that are, like 10 minutes long that feel like a lifetime. So, if a film is good, I don't care how long it is. But if a film is bad, any amount of time is too long.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with that, actually. I mean, 10 minutes I can probably stomach even if it's a terrible film, but the less interested I am in the film, that threshold goes down. I mean, if it's a film from a director I, for instance, never really like, 90 minutes will probably feel like a chore, and 2 hours I might give it a miss, for instance. So it's definitely relative. And you said that it doesn't really matter how long the film is if you think you'll actually really enjoy it. So let's do that test again. But this time it's a film by a director you love. The trailer looks great. I mean, let's say it's Killers of the Flower Moon by Martin Scorsese coming out now. That's 4 hours, or just anything else by someone you love, by actors you love, in a genre you love. Everything's right, but it's 5, 6, 7 hours. Let's just run that test again, and I'll start at the lowest possible threshold of 2 hours and 15 minutes, which was Saul. So would you question watching it if it was 2 hours and 15 minutes? No. Okay. 2.5.
Yeah, I'm still the same at the same point.
Fair enough, because there is a time constraint. 3 hours? 4 hours? 5 hours? 6 hours?
Yeah, I think I'll stop at 6 hours.
If it's a film by a director I love, then I'll probably watch it regardless. But it might take me a little bit longer if it's like 3 hours, 4 hours or something.
Probably for 6 hours, I'd have to do something really good with my scheduling, because while I'm not a film purist, I don't give up on films, and I like having the option to be able to watch them in one go if I can. I just don't mind breaking it up if I'm not too invested in it. It's a long film. So, 6 hours would be, quite hard to accommodate. Mm-hmm. So I guess it'd sort of be the thing where I'd sort of be looking, where to fit it in. I mean, even 3 hours is a long time if it's like a cinema screening. Like Beau is Afraid is out in cinemas at the moment. And I've decided, no, I'm actually not going to see that in cinemas because I just think I'll get more out of it if I've got the possibility of taking a break halfway through rather than having to endure in one go if I'm perhaps not liking it as much. But so some of it's also got to do with my history with Ari Aster as a director because I haven't found his other two films to be quite as worthwhile as the praise makes out.
You might be breaking Tom's heart here in more ways than one, but...
Oh, no, Tom's aware of it. He should be from the previous episodes that we've done.
You are breaking my heart, though, Sol, every time I hear it. But it's okay. I can forgive you. I can live with it.
All right, but Tom and I still haven't tapped out. So let's say, once again, it's a film from a director you love, in a genre you love. The trailers look great. Will you still rush to see it if it's 7 hours?
Well, yeah, to be honest, from your description, I'm thinking of a newly discovered sci-fi epic from Stanley Kubrick that's been lost to time, and it's 10 hours long, and I'm there to watch it, Chris. I'm there to watch it. I think that would probably be my limit, though.
all right, yeah. No, I'll sign up for that too. Then, like, if it's if it's Stanley Kubrick or I don't know, Godard, if it's one of my all-time favorite directors. Trying to think of something I actually love that's over the 10 hours mark, and I can't right now. But yeah, if that was released, if there's something like that, I would probably jump on it as soon as possible too. I mean, I do love Out One. It's a great movie. That's over 10 hours long. I had to go through my entire list here now. But yeah, I would be there too, Tom. So we're champions of anti-long film bigotry here now. That's pretty interesting. I didn't think it would work out quite like that.
I know, we are. And thinking about this imaginary film that I've created by Stanley Kubrick, I mean, he put breaks in his longer films anyway, so I think he would accommodate us.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's true. But if it's not, Stanley Kubrick, if it's not these kind of exceptional cases, let's try to see if I can get you to become a little bit more bigoted or, expose yourself a little bit more. Do you believe that there is a kind of general ideal runtime for a film? Let's say for the average normal film, is the runtime of 90 minutes to 2 hours thereabout? Is that kind of the sweet spot?
I would say that 90 minutes to 2 hours is kind of the sweet spot for most audiences. It's probably the runtime which I watch the most films from. And I know that when I'm watching a film with my partner Sarah, if I suggest a film that's over 2 hours, it's probably going to get vetoed pretty quickly. So yeah, I think that's the kind of sweet spot for most people, I imagine anyway.
That's a hard one because I think, unless I misinterpreted it, you're asking two different things. What is the ideal run time for us personally, as well as what we think it is for most people? I'd say for me personally, I like films that are generally maybe, say, 75 to 90 minutes is pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of really great films out there that are just over the 80-minute mark. I mean, there's not a lot you can do with a film if it's too short. So, there's a lot you can do with it. But, in terms of being a narrative, if you have at least 75 minutes, you've got a chance to really flesh things out. And, yeah, I mean, I don't want to be Pompo the cinephile, but, 90 minutes is sort of the stage where, I can sort of like feel myself that I've been watching this film for quite a while and either I'm invested in it or I'm starting to look at, is it getting to the point where it might be wrapping up? So, yeah, I'd say 75 to 90. If it's something in that range, it gets recommended to me, I'll definitely watch it. If it's up to 100 minutes, it gets recommended to me, I might watch it. And I guess the longer it gets, like I said, if it gets over 135 minutes, some of these doubling the canon nominees at the moment, that are 135 plus minutes long, I'm like, well, it's going on the back burner at the moment. whereas everything in the 75 to 90-minute range is sort of going on my watch list as a priority. Just because I guess it's easier to fit in, but also because I know if I don't like it, I don't have to, force myself to endure it. I don't have to take a break and resume it later. In terms of where I think most people are, I think the ideal runtime is actually somewhere between maybe 25 to 45 minutes. I know that sounds massively short, but most people, you have to include our kids in that category. So
Okay.
as attention and span point of view, are not 8 minutes YouTube clips. I mean, yes, possibly. Some
30
of the
seconds TikTok clips. Obviously, that's the attention span.
yeah. But look, when I'm showing off a film in class, the period's only an hour long, and you have to talk about it first or whatever. So you never finish the entire thing. But I can usually do a 20, 25-minute stretch before some of the kids get antsy. So I'd say, it's sort of probably whereabouts it's at. So, yeah, I don't know. Varies depending on the film. But, yeah, I'd say for me as an adult, 75 to 90. For most people, maybe something between 25 to 45.
Wow, okay.
I think Sol's raised an interesting point there, and I would agree with him about the runtime thing. If I suggested to most of my friends, do you want to sit down to watch a 3-hour film? The answer would probably be no, regardless
Would
of...
it though? I mean, aren't half of Marvel's films like 3 hours or close? like if you look at the films that people are actually going to see at the cinema or rewatching at home, all of these Hollywood blockbusters, they're just been getting longer and longer, and most of them are over the 2.5 hour mark, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a good point, although I don't think I'd be suggesting watching that kind of film because they're not really films that I enjoy. But what I was going to mention was that as an alternative to the 3-hour film, if I mentioned to a friend, do you want to start a series, each episode is half an hour, I could see us sitting down and, on a weekend, you could watch 10 episodes. Like, my friends love binge watching TV series, and it seems to be more digestible if there's inbuilt breaks and they could stop it at any time, but they'll still go on for the duration that would be potentially longer than a 3-hour film. And I always find that strange. I suppose it's just a different perspective, but for me, I'd always just prefer to be invested in a film rather than a TV show, because kind of like similar to Sol's point, 3-hour film, if I don't like it, I've only wasted 3 hours, but if a TV series that, it runs it for like 10 hours the first season, and then if I don't like it, well, it's like, yeah, that's a big waste of time.
Well, the runtime thing is different if I just want to sit down and watch something versus I want to watch a film, since people are talking about, series and 30-minute length things. For a feature film, my sweet spot is probably 80 to 110 minutes. That also just happens to be like most horror films. So those tend to work out pretty well. But often, like if my boyfriend and I are just going to like watch something, we would generally choose to watch like a 30 to 45 minute episode of a show over a film. But he's also like, if I want to watch a film, he's happy to watch any length of film. Like, he doesn't care if it's 60 minutes or 5 hours. He's happy to watch anything. So for the sweet spot of other people, I think it just depends on the person and the situation and the film. But I think, yeah, people are more likely to want to watch something that's short just because it's hard to just sit there in silence for hours if you're hanging out with your friends or whatever.
I think if people are going to the cinema, for example, if it's like much longer than 2 hours, 2.5 hours, they might skip it. But then again, I think a lot of the Marvel films and the really popular ones are actually longer than 2 hours. It depends. I mean, like I said, if you want to go and see like a stupid comedy, then maybe you want it to be less than 2 hours. You just want to go along for a couple hours.
Yeah, I think that for some people, it might actually, the longer it is, sometimes the better. I mean, maybe not 4 or 5 hours, but with the cinema prices these days, if you kind of go out for an outing, like this long spectacle, like Avatar 2, etc. Like they're pretty long. So I do think that people want to kind of feel like they're getting their money's worth as well.
Yeah, if Avatar 2 was like 90 minutes, I think a lot of people would be disappointed because they're spending money to see it. They know the film takes a lot to get made. So sometimes I think, especially films of like, really like impressive special effects, I think nowadays I feel like people expect something longer. In fact, maybe even the blockbusters are longer now than they were in the 90s, but I can't back that up with anything, but that's my impression because I think
I think you're definitely right there. I mean, there's no way that
I think people want more value for their money, and I also think the films are costing a lot of money, and I think when they're using all these kind of impressive effects, there seems to be more of an expectation now that the film will be more like substantial and longer.
So to get a little bit more, shall we say, philosophical, what is it actually makes a film, quote unquote, too long? Is it simply the runtime, or is there something else as well?
I think it can be the style of cinema as well. If you've got slow, meandering art house cinema, then 2 hours of that can sometimes seem a lot longer than 2 hours. I suppose it kind of depends on the perspective of the viewer, because for some people, slow cinema like that is a great experience that they relish and enjoy. Whereas for me, it's not something that I usually seek out. So if you get a 4-hour art house film, quite slow cinema, then that's going to feel a lot longer and is perhaps something that I'd be less likely to seek out, because I'm more likely to become bored throughout that. Though I will take a risk. I'll watch these things occasionally if people whose tastes I respect recommend them. But yeah, it does take quite a lot to persuade me to give something like that a go.
So, to be honest, this sounds like a riddle. What could make a film too long other than the runtime?
Or if there is something other than the runtime, if it's just the runtime, we can just say so. It's okay.
Oh, well, no, it's not just the runtime. Like, I do like, well, at least one 5-hour film. Actually, two. So I do like longer films. I guess when a film feels too long, it's because there's a lot of scenes in it that feel superfluous or have a purpose that's not entirely clear. And since Tom's already gone ahead and slagged art house cinema, I'm probably going to have to jump on that bandwagon. That there's a lot of art house dramas out there. And because they're not telling a specific narrative, or the narrative isn't the main focus point, it's more of a mood piece, or it's mostly about people sitting around and doing things rather than telling a story, it's much easier to fill in those films that some scenes are superfluous, even if they're not. But I guess it's going out to watch a film for, if you're watching it out more for the mood, or you're watching it more for the narrative. And if you're watching it for the narrative, anything that doesn't seem to contribute to it will make it feel too long. But it's not just art house cinema. I mean, I recently saw this film. I actually don't know the Italian pronunciation. Etoile? I don't know. It translates as ballet in English. It's a Jennifer Connelly film, which Ben recommended for the doubling the canon exercise, and it's sort of about Jennifer Connelly thinking that she might be this deceased ballerina and assuming a personality, but everything's filtered through the perspective of her boyfriend. And it's not just the perspective of a boyfriend, but it's also that the boyfriend's got all these side scenes where he's with his uncle and they're bidding things at auctions and they're trying to fleece older women out of money or outbidding them and try to swindle people for prices to buy artifacts. And absolutely none of that seemed to have anything to do with Jennifer Connelly getting possessed. So for me, that film felt too long, even though it was probably somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes. It felt too long because a lot of things, including this plot summary that I'm giving, feel too long.
Yeah, well, the runtime for me, I guess, more of a practical thing. So I don't think the runtime really has anything to do with the film is too long or not. It's more like, do I just want want to sit down here. So yeah, just a film not being good will make a film too long. I forgot what I was saying.
So bad films are long and good films are not long.
Yeah, well, yeah. For me, it's more like the flow of the film. If I'm into the film, it could be 10 hours, and aside from like needing to eat or go to the toilet, then I'll be into it, and it doesn't matter. But yeah, like I was saying before, if a film is 4 minutes and I'm hating it, that might as well be 6 hours. It doesn't really matter to me. Like I'm not. It depends on my mood as well. If I really feel like sitting there watching a film, then I'm happy to watch anything, any length. If I only want to be there for a short amount of time, then the runtime will matter. But yeah, mostly it's just whether I'm enjoying the film or not. Well, yeah, to determine whether it feels long.
I guess I feel the same way as Lauren. I think the main thing is how much I'm enjoying a film. So whether it's an hour and a half or 2.5 hours, if I'm engaged, then the runtime doesn't matter that much. I think if I don't like a film much, then the longer it is, the more it becomes a struggle. So I think that runtime is much more important if it's a film that you don't particularly like, because it just drags on. But if you're enjoying it, for the most part, if it's short or long, it's going to be worthwhile.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with both of you as well. That I mean, a 4-hour film can feel shorter than a 90-minute film. It's possible. It happens, and I'll just really disagree with Tom. What is it about contemplative films in general? If anything, if I see a long contemplative film, I'll actually be more likely to see it. And I'm not 100% sure why. I think that part of it is that the fact that the pace is kind of slowed down makes me expect it to be longer. It doesn't feel as forced when it's longer. Whereas films which are based on plots, they can feel they feel bloated a bit quicker for me. Like I can see irrelevant scenes. I mean, I completely agree with you on Ballet, by the way. So like those scenes with the boyfriend and his uncle, they just don't add much to the film at all, and I don't really get why there's so much of them and why Jennifer Connelly's character isn't given the focus. And I think that these kind of throwaway scenes in narrative films, that they can just feel extra, especially if I'm not as caught up in a narrative. But contemplative films, especially if they don't have a narrative, and like you said, Tom, they're all about the mood, then you can kind of just catch that mood. I mean, sometimes they're just way too long anyway, so sometimes they're boring, sometimes they don't work for me. But generally, I just feel like, okay, I don't feel like I'm looking at the watch as often when I'm watching one of them.
Yeah, I think it's just a slight difference of perspective there, Chris, because long films that are narrative driven are far more likely to keep my engagement than ones that are based on mood and a feeling. I'm not opposed to watching them. I just know that my chances of enjoying them are far less than if it's a more of a conventional narrative, specifically when it comes to long runtimes, that is.
And just going back to one thing we discussed on a previous question, which was, where Saul gave 85 to 90, or was it 75 to 90 minutes as the golden threshold. I actually feel like below 80 minutes or even below 85 minutes can often feel a bit too short. There are exceptions. They have favorites in my top list that are under that limit. I didn't expect there to be that many, but there are. But very often when something is 75, 80, 85 minutes, it can just feel very compressed, especially if it's more narrative or if it's not an animated film or a silent film. It can just feel like, it's just flashing by really quickly. I mean, the films I have in my list that are that short are usually silent, or they're, for instance, from Robert Bresson, etc., where the point is that, really concise nature. But at least for me, that gets too short. Does anyone else have that problem where, films under, like feature films, but under a certain threshold are actually too short or can be too short?
I think we're in danger of revisiting territory from the short film podcast here, but I do have to agree with you, Chris. I mean, runtimes rarely come into consideration for me when choosing a film, but film that's under 80 minutes, I'm with you on the fact that they may be a bit slight, not so much to them. So it's not something that I would usually give any preference to. But films 80 minutes and more are usually more likely for me to sit down and watch.
That's very interesting because I'm obviously in quite a different camp to both of you. I mean, anybody who's listened to our Do You Watch Short Film podcasts know that I don't really seek them as much as I seek out features, and that I don't review them if they're too short. So I have this like 44-minute cutoff point. But I guess anything where it's 44 to 75 minutes, which is sort of like the edge of my ideal time, I guess to me it's a fairly easy view. So like it's easy to fit in time-wise. I know that if I'm not going to like it, I'm not going to be sitting there forever to watch it. So don't really mind it too much. It all depends what the directors do with the material, though. I mean, I was just to rewatch today Homesdale, which is Peter Weir's first film. That one only runs 48 minutes long, and that definitely feels too short. But a lot of that's because he was working at a shoestring budget and he didn't develop things as well as maybe he could have done. But it really depends on the film itself. I think most films that I watch don't feel too short. It's not really a thing that I find myself writing in reviews quite a lot. I mean, I don't often complain about films being too long either, but I probably find clever ways of saying that without actually saying it. So, talking about superfluous scenes or superfluous subplots. So I do find ways of suggesting that, whereas I guess I find it's less common for me. I mean, Homesdale definitely gave me that feeling when I watched that today, but it's definitely less common for me to complain that I actually wanted a film to last for longer. I mean, even my favourite film is only 82 minutes long, and while I would love to see a director's cut of Videodrome with more scenes in there and like more body horror, I think it's perfect as it is. I think it's 82 minutes at the power runtime, which is just absolutely perfect for it.
But don't you have like a semi-tie and the other film is Fanny and Alexander?
Oh, yeah, no, that actually is quite interesting. So while Videodrome is my number one coming in at 82 minutes, Fanny Alexander is 5 hours long. And then my number 3 is Solaris, which I think is around the 3-hour mark. And then I've also got Eyes Wide Shut in my top 6, and that one's, I think, about 2.5 hours. So even though I don't really edge towards longer films, I've actually got 3 films in my top 6 of all time that are 2.5 hours or longer, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, I'd still say that I generally don't go for long films.
It sounds like you need to watch more long films because then they might creep into your top 10 because you seem to have an affinity with them, even though you don't venture into them that often.
Well, I mean, the whole idea with a longer film is, there's more to love about it because it's a longer film. There's more great scenes. I mean, that's probably why Fanny Alexander really stands out for being the most out of Bergman's films, because it is so long. There's so many great moments in there along the way. Whereas if it's a shorter film, I guess you have less of those outstanding moments, or they come up less frequently. But yeah, I don't know. I guess just for what I've found in general, a lot of longer films, unless I'm really invested in it, it's just a bit of a turn-off for me. But yeah, who knows? I should definitely watch a lot of longer films, because when we were comparing stats earlier on, I don't know if everybody put their stats in, but Chris sent some links there. I'd seen a lot less long films than everybody else.
I think with long films, there's more to love, but there's also more to hate. And I go back to my point that it just depends on if you like the film or not. So I still don't think the runtime makes that much difference. It's just more about if you like it or hate it.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with Adam and also disagree with Saul a little bit there too, that long films are a bit of a double-edged sword. So I was actually going to save this question for a bit later, but at least for me, I tend to be more impressed the longer a film can maintain my attention. So if a 90-minute film keeps my attention, does lots of great things, I'll love it, like it, etc. But if a 4-hour film does the same thing, I'll often feel even stronger emotion towards it, because there is this risk that you have great ideas, you have great visuals, but then it starts to peter out as that runtime goes on. It's it's quite hard to keep someone's attention. It's quite hard to just do it consistently. And this goes back to the short discussion we had in our short film Bigotry episode as well, which is kind of a sequel to where I said, I'm not as impressed by, a 10-second short, 4-minute short, because it's so much easier to keep my attention that way. It has to do something spectacular to really grab me. But for a 4-hour film, I can often see that, even if the individual parts aren't as necessarily striking, a 4-hour film that just impresses me throughout will more often than not become a favorite. So do you feel that longer films just gives you more to love? Do you feel like it gives you more to hate? Or do you get more impressed if a particularly long film manages to just keep your attention and impress you throughout?
I actually get quite impressed if a 90-minute film can keep me invested throughout. So I know that I guess you see out the 4-hour film as a challenge because it's going to be so awesome if this 4-hour film can keep me invested for so long. And, I sort of get that. But from, I guess the same point of view, I know that being a non-film purist, that for a film to actually keep me going and to not stop it, and not pause it, not take a break for 90 minutes, when I'm not in the cinema, so when I'm at home and I've got the option to do it, for a film to actually keep me fully invested for 90 minutes, it actually is quite an achievement, I think. I don't know if it's maybe because I'm more ADHD than other people. I don't know. But for it to actually fully invest me for the entire 90 minutes or longer, when I've got the option to stop it or pause it, I think that's actually quite an achievement.
It is definitely impressive for a longer film to manage to hold your attention for the duration of the runtime. Though I don't think that's something that I would ever consider when rating a film. I don't think I would apply higher ratings to a longer film just because of that reason. But it's definitely an interesting perspective.
Sort of similar to Soul, where I'm just impressed when any film can keep my attention. It doesn't really matter the length. Most films don't get my attention. So, it's nice if a long film keeps my attention, but it doesn't really make a difference to me if, rating wise or impressiveness wise.
I guess although I said the quality is more important than the runtime, I think there is something, if a film is 3 hours plus and you like it, to me, that feels a little bit different than liking a 90-minute film, and maybe it boosts the rating a tiny bit that you've been able to be engaged for so long in a film, because I think there's something a little bit more impressive about being able to make such a long film and keep the audience engaged the whole time. So I think there's certain films that are more memorable or stick in your mind more years later because they were so long and yet you still like them than had they just been a shorter film.
Yeah, I think you're completely right, Adam. It's not just that because they're so... Well, it is actually in part because they're so long, because they just have more. It's a bit like how people can get, for instance, far more obsessed with a TV show than a regular movie. You have more plot lines, more things are happening, more characters. There's just such a much bigger world to kind of dive into. I mean, you can look at, I guess franchises in a way count as well, though they're similar to TV shows. Like these big epic films, they just have so many things that can kind of stand out and shower you with. And I think that's what Saul said too, that there's just so much to love. Though sometimes I do also feel like even if individual scenes are strong, that a long film can lose its drive. And I'll apologize to, I think Matthew Scott was a frequent listener of ours. I saw one of his favorite films recently. I think it's actually his favorite, The Satin Slipper by Manuel de Oliveira, which is about 7 hours long. And it's a very unique film. It has this kind of stripped down theater-esque backdrop, a lot of experimental touches. It's beautifully done. It's very impressive, but it's in 3 parts. And I was very invested in, I would say, the first 2 hours or so. Then I started feeling like it kept Like the scenes were still good, were still interesting, but it felt like the story wasn't starting. It felt like there kept being new introductionary scenes, and like I just started to become a little bit frustrated, maybe a little bit burnt out as well, just on this length and on feeling like it's not really progressing. Do you think that this is like, is this an issue that you sometimes struggle with long films as well?
I guess the issue with longer films is they do tend to be more leisurely paced, or maybe they'll be set over a number of days rather than a number of hours. So I guess that could give to the feeling of it moving a bit slower. I mean, you don't really see a 5 hour, violent, action film. Don't really see a lot of that. So I guess a film that's very long, the directors are expecting you, or the filmmakers expecting you to get invested in it for long enough that you're happy for it to move along at its own pace. And I guess that can work sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't work. I don't know if it's necessarily due to a lack of drive, or maybe they're moving too slow. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. It's just usually if a film is quite long, it's because the directors or the filmmakers are trying to do something with it, try to expand it over a number of days or a number of months or a number of years, or they try to protract it out in some different way. So I don't know, I can't think of any good examples offhand. But yeah, I guess it depends how much you get invested in. And I guess I'm thinking of something maybe like Once Upon a Time in America. I think it's close to the 4 hour mark. That's an amazing film. But again, that one's one that's set over a number of years. So it's letting you get invested in that, invested in the characters and what's happening. And I suppose if you're not invested in that, that's when the 4 hour film can start to feel like it drags out.
I think I would agree with what you were saying, Chris, and Sol also. One thing that long films require is often a lot of patience and effort from the viewer. They can be much more involving, but you've got to make sure that you're giving them your full attention to get the best out of it. Whereas with shorter films, it's often quite easier to be more passive as a viewer and still enjoy them because of the pace of the film.
And that might also be why people are more drawn to TV episodes, like you mentioned earlier, too.
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head there, Chris. Because I always prefer to sit down and watch something that's, going to provoke feelings, maybe give me some things to think about, rather than just, a short, passive comedy TV series or something like that. I guess that's just my preference. But yeah, I would agree there.
So we haven't actually been as negative as I thought we would be earlier. And I think Saul is the only person in this podcast who kind of has anything near an aversion to long film. But as he said earlier, his second favorite film is Fanny and Alexander. So I'd love to hear, do you guys have many 3, 4, 5 hour long films in your top 100? And what's the longest film you have in there?
The longest film in my top 100 is actually in my top 5. My number 5 is Children of Paradise, which comes in at 3 hours, 10 minutes. That's an incredible film. I absolutely fell in love with it the first time I watched it. And I have revisited it, which is pretty rare for me to revisit films anyway, but to revisit a long film is something that's quite impressive. Other than that, there aren't really many long films in even my top 1,000. I suppose it's because, I don't generally seek out long films.
Well, that's quite a coincidence. It's not my longest, but Children of Paradise is actually my number 3 of all time. So that's absolutely wonderful. It's in both of our top 5s. I think the longest film in my top 100 is Eros Plus Massacre by Yoshige Yoshida, which is 216 minutes. And Narcissus and Psyche by Gabor Body, which is 261 minutes. Oh, and sorry, Scenes from a Marriage by Bergman, the miniseries at 283 minutes. They were actually back to back in the list here now, so I got a bit of a run up there. So yeah, I think I have 5 or 6 3-hour plus films in my top 100. So not that many, but not terrible either.
I think the longest film in my top 100 is The Human Condition 3, but I have all 3 in my top 100. I think I've got all the Human Condition films and all the Lord of the Ring films in my top 100, and I think they are the only ones that are over 3 hours. Looking at the IMDb films over 3 hours, without including miniseries, I've liked less than 20. So yeah, there's actually not a lot.
From the looks of things, I've only got 4 films in my top 100 that are actually go past the 3-hour mark. So that's Schindler's List, JFK, Fanny Alexander, and The Wolf of Wall Street. So other than those 4, there's nothing else in my top 100 that's 180 minutes or longer.
I was just going off the top of my head on films, but I've now looked at the link, and I apologise for revisiting this, but I have actually got quite a few that I completely forgot and didn't even consider. So there's Andrei Rublev, there's Seven Samurai, there's The Green Mile, all of which are in my top 100. I need to do my research better for next time. But yeah, there's actually quite a lot more than I realised 3-hour plus films.
Yeah, see, I do too, though maybe not in my top 100, but films that are really bloody close. So what about you, Adam?
So I think, I don't know about top 100 because I don't have a proper ranking. The Human Condition trilogy, like they certainly are the first ones that I would think of. Then this another one by the same director, I don't know how you pronounce it, Kaiden. I also, Magnolia, Shortcuts, and A Brighter Summer Day. There's a couple more Japanese ones, I'm not even going to try and pronounce them. So I think a lot of the longer ones for me are probably like half of them are Japanese, and then the rest. I think Magnolia and Shortcuts are kind of similar types of films, and then I had The Green Mile as well. Actually, Tom mentioned would also go in there. So I think I don't know if they're top 100 all of them or not, but I certainly would have a few that I rate very highly, mainly like Japanese or Asian films. Looking at the list, like Seven Samurai as well, things like that. And then there's an occasional American one that I would add in as well. It's difficult when you look at IMDb because some of the ones that come up on the list, like Decalogue or like OJ Made in America, I wouldn't really consider them to be films because I think they're broken down a bit more into different parts. But yeah, that's my list.
All right. So there's a lot of love for longer films there, it seems. And we mentioned earlier that there were some links we've had. So I prepared IMDb links for the amount of films we've seen over 3 hours, over 4 hours, and over 5 hours. And it would be interesting to hear your numbers. So I can see that I've seen just 157 films over 3 hours, 50 films over 4, and just 27 over the 5-hour mark. Yeah, we definitely need to change that. So we need to force you to watch a lot of long films.
Most of the ones that IMDb lists are miniseries, which I actually like. I've really highly rated almost all the miniseries. But yeah, according to IMDb, I've seen 147 titles that are over 3 hours, but that includes a lot of miniseries. Without miniseries, it's about 102. And as I said before, I've liked 17. So there's not many over 3 hours that I like at all. The longest film I've seen, although Chris said earlier that it was intended to be a miniseries but wasn't released as one, is Out One, which was 729 minutes. I don't remember it at all, but I hated it. And the next two would be West of the Tracks and Showa? I don't know how to pronounce that one. Those are the 3 that I've seen that are over 500 minutes.
Yeah, Out One is the longest I've seen as well.
Okay, so first of all, one of the Japanese films I was trying to talk about earlier was A Fugitive in the Past. Unfortunately, I have my IMDb settings, the original title, so I don't know.
Great film.
Looking at the IMDb list in terms of runtimes, like I said, I think half of them are actually not feature films. The ones I've seen that are the longest films I've seen are Napoleon from 1927, The Best of Youth, which I think, can't remember if it was on like an IMDb list or something, but there's a reason I watched it, and Satan Tango, which is the one I infamously fast forwarded part of, which is the only time I've ever done it. But the runtime was like 7 hours, I think, and there was like about a scene of like about half an hour of cows, and eventually I started fast forwarding it. But that's the only time I've ever done that in any film. But those three films, the longest ones I've seen, I didn't hate them, but none of them would be close to being favorites. And yeah, most of the other ones I've seen are more in the kind of 3 hour, 180 minutes, 200 odd minutes range. They're the longest three by far, I think.
So I've seen 3 films over 5 hours. The aforementioned Saints Tango, which got a 5 from me. So I kind of wish that I had fast forwarded through the cow scene, even though it's against my nature. Kind of jealous that you did that, Adam. So yeah, well done for having the guts to go ahead with it.
Thank you, Tom. It's about time someone was honest about it as well. So I appreciate you. I've had a lot of criticism over the years for that. So
I was going to say that your film buff card should be revoked, but now there's a schism here. There's a lot of support for fast forwarding through cow scenes.
Tom is our number one film purist, so for him to say it really means a lot. So sorry for interrupting. Carry on, Tom. Thank you, though.
Well, I'm glad to have made your day, Adam. That's good. And the other 2 films over 5 hours are Napoleon and The Best of Youth. And I did enjoy those both somewhat. They both got 7 out of 10. So, yeah, it was just Satan Tango that tested my limits a bit. But I am glad to have seen it. At least I know that it's not for me. And, yeah, that was a day of my life I'll never get back.
I wanted to say one other thing. With Napoleon, that was actually the film that we saw with people from the forum. So there was about 10 or 11 of us that went to see it. Lauren was there as well, and I've got bad memories of that one, but it was mainly because I slept like I came down from Edinburgh for it, and I slept like terribly. Actually, my cat was like really like my cat was missing, and there was a lot of factors involved, but like I slept really badly. And then we went to see Napoleon with like a live orchestra, and obviously it was this amazing thing. But I barely slept, and I spent like and it went on for like 7 hours, and I spent the entire time trying to stay awake. So that wasn't the film's fault, but yeah, that's another bad memory. I mean, and also when we watched it, there was like a 10-hour standing ovation as well, and. So actually, I wish I could see it again like that, because seeing it with a live orchestra is obviously incredibly impressive. But with longer films, if you're not in the right mood or if you're tired, I think there's more factors about you personally, like tiredness, that affect a long film than would affect like a 90-minute film.
I'm curious, Adam, if it was a struggle for you, I want to know how it was for the orchestra playing for 7 hours. I suppose we'll never know, but I imagine that was quite a chore.
No, they slept well the night before, so they were okay. They were actually asking me if I was all right, so don't worry. It was we got a break of like an hour and a half. We went for a meal, so I'm sure they got to recharge a little bit as well.
That's good. I'm glad.
It's been a very supportive podcast so far. We need Tom on it much more.
So, in terms of the longest films that I've seen and how many long ones I've seen, look, according to the links which Chris gave us, I've only rated 4 films that clock in above the 5-hour mark. And that jumps to 8 films when we go down to 4 hours. And one of them actually is a really amazing film, which is Rameau's Nephew by Diderot, if I pronounce that correctly, the Michael Snow film. So that one's 4 hours and 15 minutes, and that's an amazing film. In terms of the longest film that I've seen, it seems to be, well, I'm not counting OJ Made in America because that's more of a mini-series. I'm not going to count the Singing Detective either. So in terms of actual films, would be 1900, the Bertolucci film. And yeah, that's an amazing film. I was not disappointed with that at all, even though that went on for 5 hours. I was fully invested in it. Definitely one of his strongest films. Great performances in there. But that's 317 minutes. It's actually tied with Mysteries of Lisbon, which went for 317 minutes and felt twice as long as that. So one of those films I'd say is definitely was worth the 317 minutes. The other one I'd say no, that was a very hard film to get through.
And Mysteries of Lisbon is technically a mini series too, no?
Yeah, but it probably is. I couldn't resist chats to slag it because I'm still I didn't hate it or whatever, but I feel sort of traumatized by it because I know I did it over quite a few days. I was just like trying to get to the end of it. I was like watching it like 1.5 hour chunks, and yeah, I mean that was like maybe 10 years ago now. And I still remember how frustrating it was to get to the end of it.
I still haven't seen Mysteries of Lisbon, actually. I need to get on that. I've been saying that for years.
Oh, you don't? But if you haven't seen 1900, you do need to see that because that's fantastic.
I do. That's a great film. I think it used to be in my top 100 a while ago, actually, but I haven't seen it in ages, so I need to revisit it. I do have 2 other favorites over 5 hours. It's one of them is Winifred Wagner by Hans-Jürgen Zürberg, which is also kind of like in the experimental camp a bit. It's like an interview with the daughter-in-law of Wagner about her relationship with Hitler, and it's quite intense. And the other one is La Commune, Paris, 1871, by Peter Watkins, which is this crazy folk documentary from the commune, from the Paris commune, but in a world where they have TVs and cameras. It's just a terribly bizarre world where it's like, okay, it's all TVs, they have like VHS cameras, etc. It's from the year 2000. It's an incredibly bizarre epic. I would strongly recommend to fans of Watkins. I was actually wrong earlier, or possibly when I said that Out One is the longest. If we count Heimat, that's the longest at 924 minutes, but I really kind of see that as a mini series because or a series of films. I think it's like 11 or 12 like 100-minute sections in there. It's a bit difficult for me to think of it as a film. And even Out One, I believe, was originally intended to be a mini series. It's just that he couldn't get it released on TV, so he had to release it as a film. And on that, I think we might actually have wrapped up almost everything we have to say on long films. There's not that much bigotry, possibly only Saul, though it does take a little bit extra to get us to see long films. So I would love to hear if there are any hugely acclaimed, popular long films that you feel you really need to get to, but you just haven't been able to do yet. Be that because of maybe some latent long film bigotry, or just because you need to clear your schedule and watch it in one setting. So what are those highly acclaimed long films you just haven't gotten around to?
For me, it's mainly documentaries such as Showa, because of my aversion to documentaries. And then there's also Out One, because I'm not really a fan of the director. So I feel like I should see both of them, but I can't imagine enjoying either. So there's just no real urge to watch them. But they do feel like blind spots in my viewing.
So I already mentioned Mysteries of Lisbon, which is a film that is keep meaning to see, and I'm a bit embarrassed that I haven't seen it, but I'm far more embarrassed to say that I still haven't seen Twin Peaks from 2017, because I'm a big fan of the original show. No, I actually don't consider it a film. I think it's 17 or 18 episodes long. It doesn't make sense to call it a film, but it's on They Should Pictures, don't they now? It's on Sight and Sound, so they consider it a film. So I need to get to it. I was actually going to see it when it was airing, and I was just wanted to wait until I had them all stacked up. But now I just don't have that much time for TV shows, and I think again it is 17, 18 hours long. So it's just such a huge chunk of time to invest. I need to sit down and do it, but I just haven't been able to do it yet. And I also have to admit I still haven't seen The Best of Youth, and that's a film that doesn't even interest me that much. I know nothing about the director. I've heard it's a bit melodramatic, which is usually a big no-no for me. So I'm not overly tempted to seek it out.
One film that stands out to me is the Irishman, because it's something that I would have watched when it came out, but I didn't watch at the time because of the runtime, and I still have never got around to it almost entirely, well, 100% because of the runtime.
Yeah, that's not the issue, isn't it? Because you kind of have this hype period where you feel like, okay, I need to see the film, but as soon as that hype period kind of disappears and the conversation kind of disappears, the pressure goes off, and then these kind of longer films, you're not going to have the same drive to see them, I suppose. So this also goes for shorter films as well.
Well, I don't know how to answer this question because it's trying to find what the biggest films are. So I went to the They Shoot Pictures Top 1,000, and I sorted it based on runtime, and then I looked at the 180-minute mark and going upwards, and there are quite a few big films there. So at the 180-minute mark, I have not seen Blue is the Warmest Color yet. I really didn't like The Secret of the Grain, which was the film the director did before that. So I've just 3-hour film by the same director. I just can't get my head around that. I haven't seen Inland Empire, but I've got a bit of a love-hate relationship with David Lynch. I haven't seen Tree of the Wooden Clogs. Haven't seen Abraham's Valley. I haven't seen Children of Paradise, even though you guys keep saying how great it is.
Wow. Okay, just watch it. So, I mean, it might end up in the top 100. I mean, when Tom and I agree on a film, not just agree, but both love the film, the chances of you liking it are pretty high.
Yeah, it's in the top 5s, right? So, come on, surely that's an incentive to watch it. We need to have a Children of Paradise podcast.
Yes. Also, Lauren didn't say it, but she wrote in the chat that she loves that film as well. So now you have Lauren as well. Lauren infamously hates so many classics, and Tom and Lauren are both horror fans as well, and aren't drawn to, for instance, art house. So this is not an art house film. Just to put it like that.
Okay, but it's not a horror film, is it? If it was a horror film, I'd jump on board. Although actually, speaking of horror and horror-like adjacent films, I guess you might say, I've got Birth of the Nation as a film that I haven't seen yet. That's 195 minutes. I just have no real interest. I mean, I know it's cinematically important or whatever because of the edit techniques at the time, but yeah, just no interest. Jean Dillman, I don't care that it topped the Sight and Sound poll. I still haven't seen that.
Oh, come on. We need to do a John Dillman podcast now just to force Saul to see it.
Yeah, it's just...
You know she was very influenced by Michael Snow, right?
Yeah, well, look, I'm just looking. It just gets there's just so many as I keep going. I haven't seen Chelsea Girls because I don't really like the other stuff that I've seen from Andy Warhol.
Yeah, it's not that good. If you don't like Warhol, you're not going to like it.
Oh, okay, good, awesome. I haven't seen The Sorrow and the Pity because it's just so long, just looks so depressing. There's a few films with weird titles I'm not even sure about that I haven't seen, so I'm just going to skip past that. Haven't seen The Polling because I don't have that chance to see it with a live orchestra. Haven't seen Satan's Tango. Haven't seen the Hitler film that I can't pronounce. Haven't seen Shoah. Haven't seen Out One, and I haven't seen Berlin Alexander's Flat, if I can pronounce that correctly. So yeah, quite a few long films that I haven't seen, but as anybody who listens to the Films That We Avoid podcast knows, I do avoid films. I don't apologize. I should maybe, but I don't apologize for that.
That's all right, so but I think we finally found our long film bigot, so that kind of made the episode for me at least. I was hoping there was someone just sitting there avoiding lots of long films, and it's a nice note to end it on. And with that, thank you so much for listening, everyone, and I hope you became better people after this and will watch Children of Paradise. If you haven't, join us again soon. You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.